Zierdt, and I serve as Interim Assistant Vice President for Undergraduate Education here at Minnesota State University of Mankato. What's called is our Satisfactory Academic Progress, and sometimes we abbreviate around the registrar's financial aid world is called SAPS. And so that particular process relates to our university's policy requirement for students meeting what's called good academic standing, so that they can continue on with their degree, that they can remain eligible for financial aid, etc. And so at Minnesota State Mankato and in almost every institution of higher ed, you will always have a policy, and part of that is this policy, kind of an interesting way to think about it, is actually protecting the student from the institution. At some point, as students, if grade point averages and course completion rate drops below a certain point, it's really in many ways stopping a student from getting to their degree in a timely fashion. They're also racking up a significant amount of financial debt along the way and amount of time. And so at some point, and that's where the two prongs of this policy, one is the GPA. And so at Minnesota State Mankato, our policy is saying that your local cumulative GPA needs to remain at a 2.0. So in essence, that's a C average. Your course completion rate, and that means if a student were enrolled for 12 academic credits by financial aid, it's called full-time. Most of our students here at MSU take predominantly 15 to 16 credits. Each time if a student withdraws from a course, that means that turns into a W. So if it's a 3-credit course and they withdraw from it, those are 3 credits that are accounting against the credit completion. And grades such as D- and Fs are also counting against that because they are not carrying what I would call grade point weight. So students oftentimes are like, how did I get here? I found out I got this note that came, and when we talk about notes, sometimes students are like, how do you even find out if this has happened to you? And usually, especially if you're a first semester student, you're going through your experience, you get to the end of the semester, and you may get an email, because email is our official correspondence from the university. So you're not going to get a letter is not going to go to your home. It will come through just like that. It's going to ring an email for you, and you've got mail, and this will say, we have noticed that you are now being assigned warning after your first semester, where if your GPA, local, cumulative drop below 2.0, or if your course completion rate dropped below 67%. And part of those particular numbers, the 2.0 and the 67%, are very consistent with our federal guidelines for financial aid. So we don't have a threshold that is more stringent than what financial aid has, but it's not any more relaxed. It's on par. And so when a student receives that, immediately, wow, okay, the university is telling me being on warning means I have one more semester to work to get this turned around. And in our policy, you get 1 semester of warning. You're going to work closely with your student relations coordinator and kind of making sure are your courses that you are registered for, do you have enough credits, are you on track, moving forward. And many of our students, after 1 semester of warning, they're not in any trouble academically again. They get themselves out because, again, it was a warning that kind of shakes up yourself going, whoa, I don't want to do this, because if I'm on a warning, they're going to put a hold on my registration record, which means I don't have the freedom and flexibility to do what I want. Now I need to check in with other people, which is a wonderful thing. And again, I always encourage students, you want to be connected to your advisors in all ways possible. Having a hold just means it's an invitation for a conversation. Now, if a student, after 2 consecutive semesters in a row, where their GPA is now below a 2.0, and their course completion, and in some cases, course completion drops below 67%, then the student will be assigned what's called academic suspension. Now, suspension at the university has a very strong consequence to it. It means for the student saying, at this point, you are really at challenge of getting towards your degree in a timely fashion. For many of our students, especially if their grades are struggling, their course completion rate is struggling, that's time and dollars that they've invested that are now not going to be counting towards their degree. They may actually now have to, once they're off suspension, they're going to have to repeat classes. And that's a brand new cost all over again. And so the story sometimes of how much debt a student can rack up by having this continuous suspension process, it's extremely costly, time and money. So when a student has been assigned suspension, they do receive an official correspondence from the university via email, and it will note that per university policy, suspension means 3 consecutive semesters. So let's say a new first-year student starts in the fall, lands on morning. Spring semester occurs, GPA still stayed under 2.0, or their course completion rate, they dropped some classes, got a few F's, now their course completion rate is below 67%. They are now on suspension at the end of spring, which means they are sitting out summer, fall, and spring. And the first eligible comeback would be summer 1 year later. So that consequence, that 3 consecutive semesters, is one that definitely causes pause to many. And part of that is it's by design of saying, how much further do we continue to go on, time and money? But for students that have satisfied their 3 semesters, and again, the university, as its policy, have satisfied their 3 semesters, and they come back now, when you return to the university, you go into what's called probation. And probation is saying, okay, I know I have my cumulative under 2.0, or my course completion rate is below. But once you're on probation, we're no longer going to look at cumulative. Okay, we're only going to look at 1 term at a time. And we feel for students, out of fairness, sometimes that hole gets dug pretty deep, that you will probably, the realistic of getting out of that hole in 1 semester is very, very challenging. So we say, let's look at 1 at a time, because clearly after serving a suspension, many students will have a very different outlook on how they're proceeding with their studying, their living arrangements, their social group. A lot of things have changed, and it's kind of like, how do we start fresh? And that's where the term by term. So now, student comes back, let's say they've sat out their year, they could be eligible for summer, but they're going to come back fall. That's when they're going to come back. Now, the threshold that they have to achieve, the grade point average needs to be at 2.5 just for fall, and their course completion rate has to be at 75%. So those numbers are elevated compared to what I talked about previously, but it's only looking at just the term. Okay? Many of our students find that is, yep, I can do that. I have found my way. I'm staying close because when I'm on probation, I also have a registration hold, which is begging a conversation again with our advisor. I mean, holds are the university's way of saying, come meet with me. We want to have a conversation. And so they do that. And many of our students are on their merry way. Occasionally, we'll have a student that even on probation, their term doesn't meet standard. And that happens, we're back in suspension again. But the one thing that I wanted to share with you is life circumstances, sometimes what we call extenuating circumstances. We have had students that have gone to a number of semesters here at the university in a row, do very, very well, but may have what we call kind of a crashing semester due to hospitalizations, illnesses. Sometimes some of our students are diagnosed with diseases that require all of a sudden whole world reset of their life, and knowing what kind of consequence is there when life dishes you a really challenging plate. And so we do have a process within this policy. All students are still required to sit out a minimum of at least 1 semester. But when a student has an extenuating circumstance that they can produce evidence for, such as doctor's verifications, hospital records, deaths in the family. When they have had a situation that clearly put them in this spot, we have at the university a committee that is comprised of 12 members. It's called the Academic Standing Committee, and they review appeals from students. And they look at it and like, yes, this student, clearly this is an extenuating circumstance. The advisor is supportive of this student. They have a good plan of academic, for their future plan ahead. They clearly had verifiable evidence of what happened. And a committee then can say, you're sitting out for one, but you're going to be reinstated the next term. Those are special cases. They are not, the average norm. And the threshold is pretty high. But it's also saying, we do understand some of our best laid plans life gets in the way of, and sometimes pretty traumatically. So, but I know that another reason why that this conversation is important is how do we make sure we don't even have to be in this spot. We don't even have to talk satisfactory academic progress. And so one of the first, and it probably seems very simple, but yet for a lot of reason, and part of what I want to share with you actually comes through when students are working towards finding their way back. The reason we hear a lot of students end up landing in warning and suspension, they don't go to class. And one kind of thinks, oh my gosh, they're paying at over a rate of over $300 a credit. They're racking up a lot of money, probably have a loan on this, and not go. Now, part of that may be trying that out your first semester. What can I do? Do I really need to go to class? And knowing, yes, you really need to go. And part of that is the classroom experience really provides that opportunity for a relationship. Even if you're in a largely enrolled, some of our what we call big, large lecture places, our faculty know who's sitting out there. They see patterns. They're seeing that these students are always here. They're paying attention. Who's sitting in the front row? Who is stopping by after class? They want to chat. We are not that large of a university where our students get lost. And so if students are feeling like, will they even know? Generally they do. And part of it also is at that point where the content is being discussed and you start to have a network of other students around you, those become opportunities of connecting with very positive peers who would say, we can study this together. You're struggling with this, so am I. Let's join others who we think might connect. And I know in our residence halls, there are many different study groups that form either formally or informally. Many times our students, they see different student groups along the way they want to get affiliated with because it helps them connect, especially to the classroom. And so I cannot underscore enough, go to class. It's the first step, and truly, even that information as done through group activities, through lecture, through the online pieces, there's still something about establishing that relationship with your professor, being known. We often will hear about people say, sit in the front row, sit in the front. It helps one, now granted, I don't know how all 200 in some classes are going to sit in the front row, but I would say that's a fight worth trying to have, is get into the front. Because there is a point about being proximal, sometimes that being able to stay far more in tune, far more attention, you start connecting with others who are incidentally trying to sit in the front row, trying to do well. So all of a sudden you're starting to see there's a lot of people that are aiming to do well, and you want to hook yourself into that kind of network as quick as possible. So going to class is big. Second piece that I would surely encourage for students is do take the lead in contacting your instructor, whether that's through an email, and it's not only just the time when you're having problems or when you're upset about, I got dinged off a few points for something. It's right from the very beginning, having them know who you are. Even if you're going, does that feel weird? It's just like, no. I mean, part of it, this is the experience you bought. And I always say to students, demand it. Demand the time and the attention. Because many of our instructors, they're equally wanting to get to know, they want to know your questions, because many times the questions that one student will have, probably about 5 or 7 others will have. That starts to warrant how we're going to adjust instruction. And all of a sudden, the next class period, we can go back because a number of people brought it up. But if no one's, a great learning experience isn't just going one way with an instructor throwing it out there. It's two ways with that. And so, I would certainly encourage engaging very closely with your instructors. Using our Center for Academic Success, that's our tutoring center, as one of our largest tutoring centers. Tutoring is not just for any student who's struggling. Tutoring is for everyone who wants to get better. We are seeing that students who access our tutoring center range in all GPA levels across all disciplines because people want to get better at whatever they're doing. And that's what the tutoring center is for. It's not a magnet that screams, "Are you struggling with this? All strugglers come." It's not that. It's how on earth can I, if I'm with this particular topic, I want to get better at it. I'm writing, my papers right now, and keeping in mind, see work, and sometimes even for students of knowing, if I got through my high school experience pretty easily, without a lot of effort, sometimes the reality of how they're evaluated when they come to university level work was, that might have been worth that in high school, but in the college level, we're expecting so much more. And so sometimes for students like, I really need to step this up because I have never received a grade like this in my life, and here it is. And it does not mean that you don't have the talent for it or that you don't have the ability to do well. It's just saying we're demanding more. So instead of pulling the all-nighter quickly to throw that paper together, imagine what you could do if you started perhaps 2 to 3 weeks earlier planning, having conversations with other people about your work, drafting along the way, visiting the tutoring center, especially for writing, and saying, I'd love to get some more eyes on this. And they're going to be quite honest because, again, the tutoring center, they see every ability of student in every range of classes. So tutoring center also for our Center for Academic Success isn't just for first years. You will see fourth year students there because, again, it's about getting better and keep improving and putting yourself in a place of success. And so for many of our students, the first 2 semesters start to build that foundation for you to be able to get into the program that you want to get admitted. And some of our programs have really steep competitive admission standards. Riding along a 2.0 GPA, that gap to where your program's admission is really big. And the tricky part is many times if students don't start looking at that gap sooner, by the time you are a year 2, 3 student, that gap is going to be really hard to make up. And then that's when you start seeing students, well, how do I make up that gap? Quickest way to go, repeat courses. Don't take just other random, that's the other thing. We could spend a whole week on this particular topic. Sometimes students are like, oh, I got a C- in that. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to take other things. And maybe I can build my GPA by just keep putting other things. But if we keep adding more to the record, more credits, but we're not addressing our lowest grades, our GPA doesn't improve greatly. And so that's the other thing that I would encourage first-year students to do is talk often with your advisor about your academic standing. What are the choices? Is this going to be competitive? If I want to get into this program, where I'm at now, am I showing I'm going to be close, or am I going to have to be thinking now about what particular classes might I want to repeat to improve my grade? And even in some of our classes and programs, they only will allow you to repeat it so many times. These are things often for first-year students. There's so much in the first year. There's so much to think about, and yet this part could not be more important to think about early. And sometimes it isn't until year 3 when people are getting really serious about their desired major and then realize, wow, my grades now are kind of in a spot that's not letting me get to my dream. But knowing that dream can start being achieved right from the first semester. One of the pieces in terms of our Satisfactory Academic Progress policy, many of our students become very well aware about the consequences of withdrawing for classes. That's one that sometimes people will miss the consequence. If I'm in this class, I don't know if I really like it, and all of a sudden before, if they've missed the deadlines to drop, they'll withdraw. Withdraw. There's no grade. But the tricky part is, even though there's no grade going along with the W, it's counting against your course completion rate. I've had some students that literally, they're just gobsmacked when all of a sudden, I can't believe my GPA is this, how am I possibly going to I got put on warning. And yet when you look at their academic record, they have a whole litany of W's that have been racking up. And knowing there's a time in our university about if you want to get out of a class that doesn't show up at all on your transcript, you have a little bit of a window, and that's the other thing. What should students know is the deadlines. Because after that window of getting out of a class, what we would call a withdrawal that doesn't even come onto a transcript, that's usually by the very first days of our semester. Student has an opportunity to kind of try it out for a day or two. It's pretty short, generally speaking. But then after that, each week that goes by, if a student withdraws, sometimes they will actually get some financial monetary return on the class, but after a certain point, there's no money back, and it's a W. So now, all your money for the tuition is captured by the university. You have no grade to show, and you have a W, which is counting against your course completion rate. So that's what I always say for students, W's are not always your friend. So it's important for students to talk seriously with their advisors before they risk. And sometimes that's the other case, is if a student is on the borderline edge of, if I stay in this class, if I don't do well, what will be the consequence if I drop? How does this affect my GPA? Well, for many students, don't sit back in your res room or your apartment wondering. Go to professionals on campus and ask and say, let's play out the scenarios. If we did this or this, what am I going to need to get in order to make sure that I get to come back next semester? We can do that. And so I always say, if you have a question and you're wondering, get the answer, then you know exactly what you're facing. Sometimes I think our students have said things of, I'm hoping for, and then it turns out it's like, take control of it. I mean, you need to know where you stand, and we have plenty of professionals around here that can say, this is what's happening, and if this plays out, this could be the consequence. So let's get ahead of that. And especially, usually by midterms, students will have a very good idea of where they stand, and kind of knowing that they got to kick it in gear. It's like, I'm going to really need to move on this one. Or, is this major for me? Questions. But we have plenty of professionals around here that are very willing to help on that. So the process, it begs questions. It begs questions, and it also helps people being mindful of sometimes being tenacious too about hunker in. Withdrawing might not be the answer. Perhaps really studying much, much harder, and not just throwing hours in, but connecting with all the resources to bring that together along the way. And that's the other part about our Center for Academic Success. If you've ever felt for a student like, I didn't really have to study in high school, I don't even know if I really get how you do it, that's the time to go visit with professionals and say, we can give you some strategies that really can make your time in studying really uber efficient, and you'll do a much better job. Because when people have the systems down of studying, their academic performance goes up. And for us, it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 1,000. Every one of these cases, it matters to us about how do we get things, how do we help a student recover? Is it recoverable? What needs to happen? And so that for us, we want to see that number keep consistently dropping, and knowing that the suspensions generally off of warning, far more are warned. And so we would hope clearly that number, it should not be equal, but it's going to always go down. But the warning is usually that wake-up call. And after fall semester, especially among first-year students, that number of warnings can be rather significant. It can be up around 400. And that usually is saying to students, I need to know what this means and what's my consequence. And so, again, talking with advisors, very important to know the process. That when earlier talk about that new experience often that our first year students, when they have come from home, and what I would call it's a stacking effect. What they may not have ever had to wrestle before. And the stacking meaning that I truly am absolutely responsible and in control of my time. And there are many things when you become a new university student that will be sucking up your time. And of course, the first thing that you always should prioritize, and it certainly is within my job to always say this, is go to class! You need to go to class! So as you think about those hours, going to class is huge. But then, on top of that, now start stacking. For every hour one's in class, our research is always telling us, for every 1 hour sitting in a class, add on 2 to 3, and I would definitely lean towards 3 hours that you are going to do studying. And the studying effect, again, learning the best strategies to be the most productive and efficient studier that you possibly can be. So now you've got class hours, study hours, and for many students there's going to be even more pieces that are going to stack. For many of our students at this university, having another source of income besides financial aid or reliance upon a support network, they may have part-time job. It might be on campus, it might be off campus. And so when you put that stacking effect, slowly but surely your hours are beginning to stack. And for many students, the tricky part, and also, my goodness, you have a world of new friends. Of course, they are going to give you many suggestions of all the things that you can possibly do that will take up your time. And some of that might start to erode in your stacking effect, which can harm certainly your progress. But one of the strongest things that students can do right away is when they're seeing the stacking is get into a calendar system. Either through an app on your phone that you use, through the university's MavMail system, we have a calendar. It can even be a hard copy book. There are some students that say, I need something I can touch and I can write everything down so that, okay, writing things down at least identifies what's on the stack. But the question is, especially this school one and studying one, there will be things that are due along the way. And it never fails. Students will often say, I swear, all my classes, everything comes due at the very same week. I have a paper due, I have a big exam, I have all this stuff, and it's stacking. Oh, and by the way, my employer wants me to work an extra 10 hours, and I want to do all this. So then you have choice making and prioritizing. And the more that you can start scheduling, and then not being told, okay, the paper is due here. Good study strategy would say, I need to now back up in my calendar of when I'm actually going to see myself into the library or to the tutoring center, Center for Academic Success. I'm going to do that, and I have to be intentional about that. And if you're hearing this for the first time going, well, how do I get help with that? Center for Academic Success. That is a first place to go, because literally helping with those strategies that can help alleviate the stacking effect. Because sometimes for students, when that stack gets so heavy and it has not been kind of spread out across your term, that's when people can get pretty overwhelmed. And an overwhelmed place is not a place that can free one's mind to think to their very best level. It can be very, very challenging. And so we want to encourage for students to do that. There are systems, as mentioned earlier, about the university, our email, MavMail. That is our university's official correspondence that we expect, and I use that word strongly, we expect students to use MavMail. However, MavMail can always be routed to whatever account you want, but it is a place where it all goes. So if students are saying, how do I stay cued in? That's one particular place. The MavMail system has so much with our Outlook. There's so many different, the amount of tools that we have available is immense. But there are some of the very basics that I would say get yourself acquainted with right away. The MavMail and calendar. Desire to Learn is our university's what we would call online learning facilitating platform. There's a lot of self-help regarding D2L, but I would also have to say the best kind of a guidance you can have on how do I really navigate D2L. For one, that's not necessarily where your instructor is going to tell you about how to do D2L, but our Center for Academic Success, especially all the tutors that are there that have been experienced mavericks before can give you a lot of tips for the trade. It's asking. If you're living in the residence hall, your CA clearly is a resource. Many times people that live together will start to have even sessions about learning about all the things that are here. It can be overwhelming how many tools, but start small and say, what is the basics that this university is going to expect of me to use? NavMail, D2L. And there's a whole bunch more that you can add. I would say start there and move your way forward with that. But also ask, and ask.